Welcome to Resilience and Resolve with Lance Drury.
Welcome back to Resilience and Resolve. I'm Evan Mack, joined by Lance Drury. Today, we're talking about payroll tax liability and why it can lead to personal financial crisis for business owners if not handled correctly. This is payroll tax debt when the IRS comes after business owners personally. Lance Drury in the house once again. What's going on, sir?
How you doing, Evan? It's great to be here.
Good. Let's get right
We
to
got a
it.
good discussion going today.
Oh, we do. Fresh off this Pacers victory, too, by the way, for the Halliburton jump shot.
There you go.
Okay, here we go. So why are payroll taxes such a high priority for IRS enforcement?
Well, the reason is that, it's their highest priority because the problem is they keep pyramiding that liability. So they don't want you, if you start out, you owe 40,000 and you continually not pay it, you're just owing the IRS more money. And eventually they're just going to shut you down. So you've got to stop the hemorrhaging. You have to pay your payroll taxes or ultimately they're going to shut you down. Now, the other thing is, and a lot of people don't know this, and I think this is what we're going to be talking about and what you're going to be asking me about, is that those business owners can become personally responsible for the trust fund portion of the total payroll tax. And the trust fund portion is that portion that's attributable to the employee. It's generally 50 to 60% of the total tax. And here's what happens is that, they conduct an interview. They have to determine if you're a responsible party for the business. And if you are, did you know or should you have known because you were an officer of the company, president, whatever, that the taxes weren't being paid? Well, they do a formal interview. Well, guess what? None of my clients ever submit to that interview. So I had a revenue officer once say, well, why don't you do that? I said, because the federal statute to determine whether or not you're a responsible party to determine if they can come after you personally is identical to the federal statute for tax evasion, which is a felony and punishable in the federal claim. I'm not going to let my clients go in and confess to a felony. And besides, most of my businesses are small businesses, and we all know who's in charge of that business in a small business. It's the owner of the company. And then the other reason is they can implicate other people. They ask about other people. So, it insulates some of those other people from having the trust fund asserted against them as well.
So talk a little more about trust fund. So what is trust fund recovery penalty and how does it affect business owners like personally?
Okay. So I've tried to express what the trust fund civil penalty is, and the significance is that now it's not the business assets and the business income that's at risk of seizure. It's now your personal assets and your personal income that's at risk, because they're saying you held this money in trust for the employee, and they're pretty upset about it because not only do they lose that money from the employer, when the employee goes out to fill out their tax return, they claim that as taxes paid, so they lose the money there too. And so I've even seen where people who were employees came back to the employer and sued them because they weren't receiving the Social Security benefits that they were supposed to be receiving because the owner was not paying the payroll taxes. So it is definitely, and I was at a nationwide seminar. I can't remember the woman's name, but she was one of the higher ups at the IRS at one time and just said, yeah, if we just want to shut you down if you're not going to stop the hemorrhaging on the business because you don't have a viable business if you can't pay the bills. But here's what happens. Here's how people get in trouble. Somebody goes belly up on them, doesn't pay their bill for whatever work was done. And so to keep the business going, they pay their suppliers, they pay their employees. They think next quarter they're going to catch up on their payroll taxes or next month or whatever. And it just snowballs. So one of the reasons is in bad economic times, people don't pay their payroll taxes. But the other problem is a lot of these people are great at what they do, but most small businesses don't make a lot of money. You got to supply your own health insurance. You got to supply your own retirement. A lot of them work till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And the last thing they want to do when they get home at 7, 8 o'clock at night is paperwork. I had a guy once, payroll tax, had this business, and his financials showed he had the capability of paying $1,000 a month back to the IRS. But he needed to make estimated tax payments to stop the hemorrhaging. And if he had done that, he wouldn't have paid a dime back on the back payroll taxes, but he wouldn't do it. He just refused to take our advice. He refused to become compliant. And there are certain people who are like that.
So can a payroll service provider's failure still leave the business liable?
Yes, it happens all the time that the payroll provider is not paying the payroll taxes to the federal government. But guess what? You still owe Uncle Sam the money. Now you have a cause of action, of course, against the payroll company, but Uncle Sam doesn't care about that. You had an obligation. I'm the owner of this law firm. If one of my other attorneys screws up, guess who they're coming after? Because I'm responsible for the work of my employees, and that's true for any business. You have a fiduciary obligation as the owner of the business to keep on track of what your employees are doing. And if something is adverse, then, you're responsible. I had a guy several years ago, he had to hire me twice. He owned the company, but he was only the money. He hired a guy to run it. Well, the guy wasn't paying the tax returns, and then he died. So they came after my client and almost caused him to get divorced.
Wow.
Because he didn't pay back the whole amount. I can't remember for sure if he paid back about a third of it, but he had to pay it back. And he was so mad, not at me, but he was so mad at the IRS. Why? He didn't think this was fair. And that's part of the game. If you want to own a business, you're responsible. The buck stops with you when you own a business. So you just got to realize that. Everybody thinks owning your own business is the American dream, but I got to tell you, it's a lot of work. And most small businesses, I think I read once, were 75% of small businesses didn't make $70,000 a year.
Wow.
So you better know what you're doing if you're going to be your own boss.
So what does the IRS look for when determining who's a responsible person?
There's a twofold aspect to it. Number one is if you were in charge of running the business, or you had certain responsibilities. For example, if you sign the paychecks, guess what? They can come after you for the trust fund. And the second thing is if you're an officer of the country or you're in control, you're going to have the trust fund asserted against you. So sometimes, and the other reason we don't submit to that is if they can't tell or they don't go in and get a hold of the checks of the business, you can at least shield the person from liability who has no real authority, but is signing the checks for the company. And so we never submit, like I said earlier, to that interview because it's like your client's pleading guilty to a felony, and no lawyer is going to do that.
So Lance, can you talk about protections? How can a business protect itself if it starts to fall behind? If they start to fall behind in their payroll taxes, what can they do?
Well, what they can do is call an attorney like my firm and get set up on an agreement on the back taxes. And once you have that agreement and you're 100% compliant moving forward, which means you're filing your 941s on time, which is the payroll tax return, and you're paying them on time, they're not going to levy you then. But you have to have that agreement in place and you have to stop the hemorrhaging moving forward. And then the company is protected and can keep going.
We're talking about the responsible person in this kind of liability. Can it ever be shared between multiple individuals in a business?
Absolutely. And it happens all the time. So, you have a president, you have a secretary, you often have multiple officers in the business. They all have an obligation to know what's going on in the business. And so the trust fund can be asserted against multiple individuals in the right scenario. And so you have to keep that in mind as well when you're dealing this. And again, they're not going to divvy up the responsibility between the people. They can go after one for 100%. They can go after all of them. Now, obviously, if somebody's paying part of that off, the other person's liability is being diminished by that amount. So they can't double dip against you. But they can go after one person or all of the people that may have the trust fund asserted against them when they do that, when they deem that you're a responsible party.
Any misconceptions or things people need to know about this particular topic that that you want to tell them?
Don't submit to the trust fund interview, because a lot of people not only get themselves in trouble by doing that, they can also implicate other people that the IRS would never know about and save them at least from any liability. Now, you do get into certain situations like that where informally the person who's really responsible will indemnify, will take the burden if the other person gets zapped for some of that lie. But you don't want to have to deal with all that. We have that kind of situation right now in a case, but we're representing both of them. They get along. The one guy said, "This is my fault. If they ever come after him, he's going to get reimbursed from me." But if you can prevent that, try to prevent that at the outset.
So what steps can an owner take to avoid personal risk later? I know they got to call a lawyer. I know they got to talk to you and your firm, but any other steps they can take to avoid that personal risk at a later time?
Well, don't get behind in your payroll taxes. You
Mm.
know, you've got to either be 100% compliant in filing the return and paying it, or you need to get an agreement set up on the back taxes before they come after you personally. Now, here's the other thing. Here's how this works. That trust fund civil penalty is not an additional tax. It's a separate tax. But
Wow.
here's how this works, and here's what we advise people when they have both payroll tax problems and civil penalty trust fund problems. We tell them to pay down the civil penalty first. Why? To avoid seizure of their personal assets, levies of their personal income. And secondly, as I said, it's not a separate tax. It's not an additional tax. So if you pay down the trust fund by $5, the payroll tax is paid down by $5. So when you make that payment on this trust fund civil penalty, it also diminishes the amount of the payroll tax, because that trust fund is a part of the total payroll tax liability.
Lance Drury, sir, thank you so much for your time as always.
Well, thank you. It's always great to be here. Great to talk to you, Evan. Can't wait to do it again.
Oh, me either, me either. And thank you all for joining us. If payroll tax problems are threatening your business or personal assets, get help at lancedrurylaw.com. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.